What I'm about to tell you contradicts everything your doctor has said about high blood pressure, not because your doctor is careless, but because what medicine has been teaching about hypertension for the past 50 years is dangerously incomplete. I'm Dr. Alex Thompson. I've spent 22 years as a cardiac surgeon. I've opened chests, bypassed failing hearts, and held human arteries in my hands that should have lasted another 30 years but didn't. And what I've seen on that operating table has permanently changed how I think about blood pressure. Here's what nobody tells you at your annual checkup. Your doctor looks at the number on the cuff, 148/92, and reaches for the prescription pad. Reduce your salt, take this diuretic, come back in 3 months. And the number comes down. So everyone agrees the problem is solved. It isn't. Because high blood pressure is not a fluid problem. It was never about too much water in the pipes. It's about the pipes themselves. What I see when I operate on a hypertensive patient isn't a vessel that's simply too full. It's a vessel that has structurally failed. Stiff, calcified, sometimes so rigid I can barely thread a suture through the wall. A healthy artery yields when you work with it, elastic, responsive, alive. A damaged artery resists. It doesn't spring back. It has lost the fundamental biological property that keeps you alive. No pill restores that. Medication manages the number on your monitor. It adjusts fluid volume. It manipulates vessel tone. It moves the reading from dangerous to acceptable. But the structural damage underneath the calcification, the cellular breakdown, the microscopic deterioration that took decades to develop, remains completely untouched. That is the conversation your doctor has never had with you. By the time this video ends, you will understand the 3 biological mechanisms responsible for your hypertension mechanisms that standard cardiology almost never addresses. And you will understand the specific 4-step protocol designed not to manage this condition, but to structurally reverse it. This isn't theory. This is the biology I've watched play out in patients who arrived at my clinic, expecting a lifetime of medication, and left with something far better. Let's begin with what hypertension actually is at the cellular level. Let me show you what I actually see when I'm standing over an open chest in the operating room, because it will change how you think about your blood pressure forever. Most people picture arteries as simple tubes, flexible garden hoses carrying blood from point A to point B. That mental image is costing lives, because your arteries are not passive plumbing. They are living, metabolically active structures. And what happens inside their walls determines whether you have a heart attack at 70 or thrive well into your 80s. Every artery in your body is built in 3 distinct layers. The one that matters most for blood pressure, and the one medicine almost never discusses, is the innermost layer. It's called the endothelium, a single sheet of cells so thin it makes tissue paper look thick. It lines every blood vessel from the largest artery, leaving your heart down to the smallest capillaries in your fingertips. This layer is not simply a barrier. It functions as a hormone-producing organ in its own right. It releases compounds that regulate blood flow, suppress clotting, manage inflammation, and signal your vessels to stay open and relaxed. When your endothelium is functioning properly, your blood pressure follows. But here is the detail most cardiologists never mention to their patients. Coating the surface of the endothelium is a microscopic structure called the Glycocalyx. Think of it as a living shield, a delicate mesh of proteins and sugar molecules just a few micrometers thick, invisible to the naked eye, yet absolutely essential to your vascular health. It keeps blood flowing smoothly without friction. It intercepts inflammatory molecules before they reach the vessel wall. And critically, it acts as a sensor detecting the force of blood flow and instructing the endothelium to release nitric oxide, the molecule that keeps your arteries wide open and your blood pressure controlled. When the glycocalyx is intact, your cardiovascular system operates in balance. When it's damaged, the cascade that follows is what I see on my operating table years later. High blood sugar erodes it. Chronic inflammation degrades it. Oxidative stress dismantles it molecule by molecule. Once that protective layer is stripped away, the vessel wall beneath becomes a target. Inflammatory cells adhere to it. LDL cholesterol burrows in. Plaque begins to accumulate. Nitric oxide production collapses. Vessels tighten, stiffen, and lose their ability to respond. Blood pressure climbs. This is mechanism 1. Glycocalyx destruction. And here is what your prescription bottle will never do. It will not rebuild that shield. ACE inhibitors won't restore it. Calcium channel blockers won't regenerate it. Diuretics won't touch it. Your blood pressure reading may improve on paper while the structural deterioration underneath continues silently, year after year. advancing you toward the exact cardiovascular event the medication was supposed to prevent. Managing the number is not the same as healing the vessel. Not even close. I want to tell you about a patient I'll call Richard. He was 64 years old. Retired. Active. He walked 3 miles every morning. He took his medications without fail, 2 blood pressure drugs he'd been prescribed after a routine physical 6 years earlier. His readings were consistently good. His internist called him a model patient. Richard believed he had this under control. Then he collapsed while raking leaves on a Sunday afternoon in October. By the time he reached my operating room, I could see exactly what his blood pressure numbers had been hiding for years. His coronary arteries weren't just narrowed, they were encased. The walls had calcified so extensively that when I attempted to place a bypass graft, the needle met resistance like I was suturing through hardened clay. The medication had kept his readings acceptable. It had done nothing, absolutely nothing to stop what was happening inside those vessels. Richard survived. But he should never have needed that surgery. This is mechanism 2, arterial stiffness. And it is the measurement your doctor almost certainly has never discussed with you. Here's why it matters more than your blood pressure reading alone. When your doctor measures your blood pressure, you receive 2 numbers. Systolic, the pressure as your heart contracts and pushes blood outward. Diastolic, the pressure as your heart relaxes and refills. The difference between those 2 numbers is called pulse pressure, and it is one of the most powerful predictors of cardiovascular risk in existence. A healthy pulse pressure sits between 40 and 50 points. When arteries are flexible, the aorta, the great vessel carrying blood away from your heart, behaves like a biological shock absorber. It expands slightly with each heartbeat to buffer the pressure surge, then recoils to sustain forward blood flow as the heart rests. The result is a balanced, moderate pressure wave throughout the system. When arteries stiffen, that shock-absorbing capacity disappears. Every contraction sends an unfiltered pressure spike directly through rigid walls. Systolic readings climb. And because a stiff aorta can no longer recoil effectively, diastolic pressure simultaneously drops. The gap between the 2 numbers widens dramatically. A reading of 162/68 tells me something a reading of 158/98 does not. The pulse pressure of 94 inches, the first patient signals vessels that have lost their elasticity. That patient carries significantly greater stroke and heart attack risk, regardless of what the systolic number alone suggests. A non-invasive 10-minute test called pulse wave velocity can measure arterial stiffness directly. Healthy arteries carry a pressure wave at roughly 7 meters per second. Stiffened arteries accelerate that wave to 12 or 15. The faster the wave, the harder your heart is working against walls that no longer cooperate. Most physicians never order this test because there is no drug to prescribe in response to the result. But arterial stiffness is reversible. Not through medication, through structural intervention. And that is precisely what comes next. To understand why arteries stiffen, you need to understand what they're actually made of, because this is where the real story of hypertension begins. Your artery wall is constructed in 3 distinct layers. The innermost is the endothelium we've already examined. The outermost is a sheath of connective tissue that anchors the vessel in place. But the layer that determines everything about arterial flexibility is the one in between the tunica media. This middle layer is an engineering marvel. It's composed of smooth muscle cells interwoven with elastic fibers, a biological composite material capable of stretching under pressure and snapping back with each heartbeat. In a young, healthy vessel, this layer is supple and responsive. It absorbs force. It accommodates flow. It protects your heart from working harder than it needs to. Then inflammation enters the picture. And over years, accelerated by hypertension, elevated blood sugar, or chronic metabolic stress, 3 things begin to happen inside the tunica media that medicine rarely explains to patients. First, calcium migrates in. Under inflammatory conditions, calcium that belongs in your bones begins depositing directly into the vessel wall. It forms microscopic crystals that gradually harden the tissue from within. Second, the elastic fibers that give arteries their spring begin to degrade. As they break down, the body replaces them not with new elastic fibers, but with collagen, a structural protein that is dense, fibrous, and completely inflexible. Third, and this is the detail that surprises even physicians, the smooth muscle cells themselves change their identity. They stop behaving like muscle. They begin behaving like bone-forming cells, actively mineralizing the wall around them. The technical term is vascular calcification. The practical result is that by the time many people reach their 60s, their arteries have more in common structurally with cortical bone than with living, pliable blood vessels. And here is what your medication cabinet cannot do. Dissolve that calcium. ACE inhibitors don't extract mineral deposits from vessel walls. Calcium channel blockers prevent new calcium from entering smooth muscle cells, which eases constriction, but the calcification already embedded in the wall remains completely untouched. So the question becomes urgent. Can this process actually be reversed? The answer is yes. But the tools required are nutritional and mechanical, not pharmaceutical. That protocol comes next. Before we get to the reversal protocol, there is a third mechanism you need to understand. In many ways, it is the most revealing of all, because it explains something that has frustrated millions of people following their doctor's advice faithfully for years. Why does cutting salt work for some people and do virtually nothing for others? The answer has nothing to do with salt. It has everything to do with insulin. Your kidneys are the master regulators of blood pressure. Every minute of every day, they make precise decisions about how much sodium to keep and how much to release into your urine. When sodium is high, healthy kidneys excrete the excess. Blood volume drops. Pressure normalizes. It's an elegant, self-correcting system when it works. The problem is that insulin overrides it completely. When insulin levels are chronically elevated, your kidneys receive a signal that effectively locks them into sodium retention mode. It doesn't matter how little salt you consume. Your kidneys will recapture and recirculate sodium that should be leaving your body. Blood volume remains elevated. Pressure remains elevated. And the low-sodium diet your doctor recommended produces results that are, at best, modest because the fundamental override is still engaged. This mechanism has deep evolutionary roots. Insulin rises when you eat, signaling the kidneys to conserve sodium and protect blood volume during the digestive period. For our ancestors eating intermittently, this was protective. In a modern life where food is constant and insulin is perpetually elevated, that same ancient mechanism becomes a liability. The biology operates through three simultaneous pathways. Insulin directly stimulates sodium reabsorption in the kidney's filtering units, pulling sodium back into circulation before it can be excreted. It simultaneously activates the sympathetic nervous system, triggering a hormonal cascade renin, then angiotensin, then aldosterone, each step commanding the kidneys to retain still more sodium. And it amplifies vascular sensitivity to angiotensin II, one of the body's most potent constrictors, tightening vessel walls in response to signals that a healthy system would largely ignore. Three separate mechanisms, all pointing in the same direction, all raising your blood pressure. Now here is the part most physicians never consider and never test for. You can have completely normal fasting glucose, a perfectly acceptable A1C, and still carry insulin levels that are silently driving your hypertension. Hyperinsulinemia, chronically elevated insulin with normal blood sugar, can persist for a decade before glucose begins to rise. During that entire window, the damage is accumulating. The kidneys are locked. The vessels are constricting. The blood pressure is climbing. Your doctor checked your glucose. Your doctor did not check your insulin. If salt restriction hasn't moved your numbers despite genuine effort, this is almost certainly why. The lock isn't in your salt shaker. It's in your metabolic environment. And until that lock is addressed directly, no dietary adjustment at the table will normalize what's happening in your kidneys. Before I walk you through the exact reversal protocol, I have a brief request. If what you've heard so far has genuinely shifted how you understand your own blood pressure, please subscribe to this channel right now. What's coming next is the part most people never reach. The specific, step-by-step interventions to rebuild your glycocalyx, clear calcium from your arterial walls, and unlock your kidneys from insulin's grip. You've come this far. Don't lose access to the rest. And if this information belongs in the hands of someone you love, a spouse, a sibling, a friend managing blood pressure on medication that isn't solving anything, share this video. One click could redirect someone's health trajectory entirely. Thank you. Now let's talk about what reversal actually looks like. Step 1. Rebuild the glycocalyx. This is where reversal begins. That microscopic protective shield lining your arterial walls. Once it's restored, the cascade of inflammation, plaque formation, and pressure dysregulation loses its foothold. So the first question is precise and practical. How do you rebuild something you cannot see? You start by stopping the destruction. The glycocalyx has two primary enemies: blood sugar spikes, and oxidative stress. Every time your post-meal glucose climbs above 140 milligrams per deciliter, a chemical process called glycation attacks the coating's protein structure, hardening it, fragmenting it, rendering it unable to perform its protective function. This happens at the molecular level, silently, multiple times per day in people eating a standard American diet. The intervention isn't extreme. It doesn't require eliminating carbohydrates entirely. It requires choosing carbohydrates that don't detonate your blood sugar: vegetables, legumes, whole fruits, minimally processed grains, while eliminating the ones that do. White bread, white rice, pastries, sweetened beverages. These foods don't just raise your blood sugar. With every spike, they are actively dismantling the most important protective structure in your cardiovascular system. Once you've stopped the damage, you rebuild. The Glycocalyx is constructed primarily from glycosaminoglycans, long, sulfated sugar chains your body produces when given adequate raw materials. The most effective dietary source is fucoidan, a sulfated polysaccharide concentrated in brown seaweed. Studies measuring endothelial function directly have shown that fucoidan supplementation restores glycocalyx thickness and improves vascular responsiveness. The clinically relevant dose is 500 to 1,000 milligrams daily. The third component is antioxidant support from whole foods: berries, dark leafy greens, beets, green tea, dark chocolate. These polyphenol-rich foods neutralize the free radicals that chemically degrade the glycocalyx before they can reach it. I applied this exact protocol to a patient I'll call William, 71 years old, 15 years of hypertension, blood pressure controlled at 134/86 on 2 medications, but with laboratory markers clearly indicating endothelial inflammation. We eliminated refined carbohydrates, introduced fucoidan at 1,000 milligrams daily, and built his diet around polyphenol-dense whole foods. At 3 months, his endothelial dilation test improved from 3.8% to 11.5%. His blood pressure dropped to 119/74. Within 6 months, he was off both medications entirely, his blood pressure stable at 121/77. The number didn't change because we forced it down. It changed because the vessel healed. Step 2. Decalcification. This is the intervention most physicians consider impossible, and that assumption is costing people their lives. The prevailing belief in standard cardiology is that arterial calcification is a one-way street: progressive, permanent, irreversible. Once calcium has hardened inside your vessel walls, the thinking goes, it stays there. You manage around it. You don't remove it. That belief is incorrect. And the biology that contradicts it has been sitting in peer-reviewed literature for years. Calcium doesn't migrate into your arteries randomly. It is directed there or away from there by a specific regulatory protein called matrix GLA protein, or MGP. Think of MGP as a molecular gatekeeper. When properly activated, it intercepts calcium in circulation and routes it toward bone tissue, where it belongs. When MGP is inactive, calcium drifts freely into arterial walls, crystallizes, and hardens the vessel from within. The activation switch for MGP is vitamin K2, specifically the MK7 form, not vitamin K1, which manages blood clotting and is found abundantly in leafy greens. K2 is different, rarer, and almost entirely absent from the modern Western diet unless you regularly consume natto, a fermented Japanese soybean product that most Americans have never encountered. The doses shown in human studies to slow or reverse arterial calcification range from 180 to 360 micrograms of MK7 daily, an amount requiring targeted supplementation. But K2 cannot work alone. Calcium redirected out of your arteries needs a destination. Vitamin D provides it, facilitating calcium absorption into bone and ensuring the mineral is properly incorporated rather than recirculating. Without adequate vitamin D, the system stalls. Both nutrients are required, working in tandem. The third component is magnesium. Chronically underconsumed and quietly depleted by stress, alcohol, diuretics, and acid-reducing medications, magnesium serves as the body's natural inhibitor of vascular calcification, preventing calcium from crystallizing inside vessel walls even when calcium levels are elevated. Form matters critically. Magnesium oxide, found in most budget supplements, absorbs at roughly 4%. Magnesium glycinate or magnesium threonate absorb efficiently and reach the tissues where the work happens. The therapeutic dose for vascular health is 400 to 600 milligrams daily. I treated a patient I'll call Eleanor, 74 years old. 4 blood pressure medications, CT imaging confirming severe aortic calcification. We implemented this 3-part protocol precisely. At 6 months, her calcification score had decreased by 9%. At 18 months, she was managing her blood pressure on a single medication, her arterial walls measurably less rigid than when we started. Regression, not stabilization. Actual regression. That is what this protocol produces when the biology is followed correctly. Step 3. Restore nitric oxide production. If the glycocalyx is the shield and decalcification is the structural repair, nitric oxide is the operating signal, the molecular instruction your vessels depend on to stay open, relaxed, and responsive. Your endothelial cells produce this gas continuously. It diffuses directly into the smooth muscle layer beneath, triggering relaxation, widening the vessel, and reducing the resistance your heart works against with every beat. When production is robust, blood pressure reflects it. When production falters, as it does when the glycocalyx is damaged and chronic inflammation sets in, vessels lose their ability to self-regulate. They tighten. They stay tightened. Pressure climbs and stays elevated regardless of what the prescription bottle says. The enzyme responsible for nitric oxide synthesis is called eNOS. And here is where the biology becomes particularly important to understand. eNOS requires a cofactor called BH4 to function correctly. When BH4 levels are adequate, eNOS produces nitric oxide as designed. When BH4 is depleted by oxidative stress, eNOS undergoes a damaging transformation called uncoupling. It stops producing nitric oxide entirely and begins generating superoxide instead. A free radical, a molecule that accelerates the very vascular damage you're trying to reverse. The nutritional solution is precise. Folate from dark leafy greens, vitamin C from citrus and peppers, vitamin E from nuts and seeds. These 3 nutrients regenerate BH4, keep eNOS properly coupled, and restore the enzyme to its intended function. No prescription required. The mechanical solution is equally specific. Isometric hand grip training, squeezing a grip device at 30% of maximum effort for 2 minutes. Resting 1 minute. Repeating 4 sets has been demonstrated in multiple peer-reviewed studies to reduce systolic blood pressure by 10 to 15 points after 8 weeks. The mechanism is shear stress. Sustained contraction compresses forearm vessels, and the subsequent release creates a powerful surge of blood flow that activates eNOS with remarkable consistency. Studies place its effectiveness on par with antihypertensive medication, with the critical difference that it addresses cause rather than symptom. The third intervention costs nothing. Nasal breathing, simply redirecting airflow through your nose rather than your mouth, stimulates nitric oxide production in the nasal passages, delivering measurably higher levels directly into circulation with every breath. A patient I'll call Harrison, 66 years old, a decade of hypertension, 3 medications, blood pressure holding at 138/87, 3 months on this protocol, dietary cofactor restoration, hand grip training 4 times weekly, nasal breathing consistently adopted. His pressure dropped to 117/74, 2 medications eliminated. His endothelium had simply relearned what it once knew how to do. Now the 4th and final step. The insulin reset. Step 4. The insulin reset. Everything we've built across the first 3 steps, the restored glycocalyx, the decalcified vessel walls, the recovered nitric oxide production, depends on this final intervention to hold. Because if insulin remains chronically elevated, the kidneys remain locked, and locked kidneys will sustain elevated blood pressure regardless of everything else you do. The most powerful tool for lowering baseline insulin is also the simplest. Time-restricted eating. Not a different diet, not fewer calories. Simply compressing your meals into a defined daily window, noon to 8 in the evening, works well for most people, and allowing your body 16 uninterrupted hours without an insulin response. During that fasting window, water, black coffee, and plain tea are permitted. Nothing that triggers insulin. What happens physiologically during those 16 hours is precisely what your kidneys have been waiting for. Insulin drops to its true baseline. The sodium retention signal releases. Your kidneys begin excreting what they should have been excreting all along. Blood volume normalizes. Pressure follows. Studies document a 10 to 12-point reduction in systolic blood pressure within 8 weeks, without changing a single food on the plate. Purely the timing, purely the insulin. But time-restricted eating alone addresses only half the equation. If your cells have developed insulin resistance, which is common and largely invisible on standard lab work, your pancreas compensates by producing more insulin even during fasting periods. The lock partially re-engages. The solution is resistance training. 2 to 3 sessions weekly of weight-bearing exercise causes muscle tissue to develop additional insulin receptors, dramatically improving cellular sensitivity. Studies consistently show a 20 to 30% reduction in fasting insulin within 12 weeks. When muscles respond to insulin efficiently, the pancreas produces less of it. Less insulin means unlocked kidneys. Unlocked kidneys means normalized pressure. 3 dietary additions amplify the effect. 1 teaspoon of apple cider vinegar before meals reduces the post-meal insulin spike by approximately 20% by slowing carbohydrate absorption. 1 teaspoon of cinnamon daily measurably improves insulin receptor function. Blueberries, consumed regularly, contain anthocyanins that enhance insulin signaling at the cellular level. A patient I'll call Theodore, 69 years old, fasting insulin of 19 despite normal glucose and A1C, blood pressure at 144/90 on 2 medications. 16 weeks on this protocol. Fasting insulin dropped to 7. Blood pressure settled at 119/76. Both medications eliminated. 2 years later, his numbers remained stable. His kidneys were never the problem. His insulin was. We fixed the insulin. His kidneys did the rest. That is what genuine reversal looks like, not a number managed down by medication, but a system restored to its intended function. I understand if this feels like a great deal to absorb at once. 4 mechanisms, 4 interventions. A fundamentally different way of thinking about a condition you may have been managing for years or decades. That's precisely why I've created a structured companion resource called the Vascular Remodeling Protocol. It consolidates everything covered today and goes further: exact supplement forms and doses, meal timing frameworks, progressive exercise instructions, and a testing roadmap so you can track measurable biological change. Not just blood pressure readings. It's available exclusively through the link in the description below. No advertisements, no sales pitch. Just a complete clinical framework, organized so you can actually use it. Now, something I need to address directly. Do not stop your blood pressure medication. Not today. Not abruptly. Not without your physician's guidance. Medication is managing a real and dangerous condition while your vessels are still damaged. What changes as you implement these protocols is the underlying biology, and as that biology improves, the conversation with your doctor about gradually reducing medication becomes grounded in data, not hope. Monitor your blood pressure daily. Watch the trend lines over weeks, not individual readings. When consistent improvement becomes undeniable, that's when the medication conversation begins carefully, collaboratively, with medical supervision. What you are not required to accept is the premise that medication is permanent. That assumption exists because standard medicine was trained to manage pressure, not repair the structures generating it. You now understand something most physicians were never taught to look for. The Glycocalyx can be rebuilt. Arterial calcification can be reversed. Nitric oxide production can be restored. Insulin's grip on your kidneys can be released. These are not philosophical positions. They are biological realities documented in peer-reviewed research realities that produced measurable results in every patient whose story I shared today. Start with 1 step. Just 1. Eliminate refined carbohydrates for 2 weeks and protect your glycocalyx from further assault. Or begin 16-hour time-restricted eating and let your kidneys finally do their job. Or pick up a hand grip device and begin retraining your endothelium 3 times this week. Every day your vessels remain damaged is another day of accumulated risk. Every day you engage this protocol is a day of structural repair. Your arteries built this condition over years. They can rebuild themselves if you give them the right conditions to do so. That choice belongs entirely to you.